There is a particular kind of wound that does not announce itself with the clarity of a clean break. It does not arrive as the definitive end of something with all the terrible but navigable grief that finality eventually permits. It arrives instead as a disappearance. As the person who hurt you, who said the thing or did the thing, or withdrew in the way that finally undeniably crossed from difficult into damaging, vanishing into themselves afterward as though the hurt they caused was something that happened to them rather than something they did to you. And you are left holding the wound and the confusion simultaneously, trying to process pain that has no clean edge because the person responsible for it has not stood still long enough to be accountable for it. Trying to grieve something that has not technically ended because they have not technically left. They have simply gone somewhere unreachable and are existing in that unreachable place with an apparent composure that feels, from where you are standing, like the most devastating possible response to what just happened between you. This is the avoidant in hiding. And understanding what is actually occurring in that hiding, what is happening in the interior of a person who hurt someone they genuinely care about and then disappeared from the consequences of that hurt, is one of the most important and most misread chapters in the entire psychology of avoidant attachment. Because the hiding is not what it looks like, and what they actually want in the depth of that hiding is not what their behavior suggests. And knowing both of those things will not undo the hurt, but it will change the shape of what you are dealing with. And the shape, as it turns out, matters enormously. Before anything else, something needs to be said plainly about the hurt itself. Because this conversation is going to spend significant time inside the avoidant psychology, inside their hiding, their fear, their private wanting, and that inside view, however illuminating, must never become a reason to minimize what happened to you. They hurt you. That is real. Whatever form it took, the withdrawal that came at exactly the wrong moment, the words that landed like a verdict on your worth, the pattern of behavior that accumulated into something that finally broke something in you, or the single act of emotional abandonment that crossed a line you did not know was there until it was already behind you. It was real. It had weight. It left a mark. And the fact that the person who caused it has now retreated into silence or distance, or the particular unreachability of someone performing composure after causing damage, does not reduce the reality of what occurred. Trauma explains behavior. It does not justify it. An avoidance wounds are real and their fear is genuine, and their disappearance after causing hurt is, as this conversation will demonstrate, driven by psychology rather than cruelty. And they are still responsible for the hurt, for the hiding, for the choice made repeatedly and at your expense to manage their own discomfort by creating yours. Both things are true and neither cancels the other, and holding both is the only honest place from which to understand any of this. So what is actually happening when an avoidant hurts someone and then hides? The first thing to understand is that the hiding is not relief. This is the assumption that wounds most deeply, the conclusion that their apparent composure and distance in the aftermath of having caused harm means that the harm did not register, that they are fine, that the retreat is comfortable, that the disappearance is the behavior of someone who simply does not care enough to stay and face what they did. This assumption is wrong in almost every case where the connection was genuine, and it is worth being precise about why, because the precision matters for understanding what is actually occurring rather than what the surface behavior suggests. When an avoidant causes hurt, when their behavior crosses from the ordinary dysfunction of the avoidant pattern into something that genuinely damages the person they are with, they feel it. Not in the immediate present tense, emotionally available way that allows for real-time accountability and repair, but they feel it. Something in them registers the damage, registers the weight of what their behavior produced in someone they care about, registers the specific uncomfortable knowledge that they were the cause. And that registration is, for an avoidant, one of the most activating and destabilizing experiences their psychology knows how to generate. Not because they are fundamentally callous people who are surprised to discover they have feelings about causing harm, but because the feeling of being responsible for someone else's pain runs directly into two of the most deeply grooved features of their attachment architecture simultaneously. The first is shame. Avoidants carry, at the core of their psychology, a foundational belief about themselves that was installed long before you arrived. A belief that at some essential level they are difficult, that they are too much or not enough, that the way they are constituted makes them reliably problematic for the people who try to love them. When they cause hurt, this belief does not stay quiet. It activates. It says, see, this is what you do. This is what you always do. You get close enough to matter, and then you damage the thing. And the shame of that, the specific, hot, almost unbearable quality of self-condemnation that accompanies it, is not something their emotional regulation systems can easily process. So instead of processing it, they flee it. The hiding is not distance from you. It is an attempt at distance from themselves. The second feature their hurt-causing activates is fear, specifically the fear of accountability. Not accountability in the legal or formal sense. The relational accountability of standing in front of someone you hurt and being present with the full weight of what your behavior produced in them, of seeing the damage in their eyes and not being able to look away, of hearing what happened to them and being required by the basic ethics of care to hold that without defense or deflection, or the management strategies that usually protect the avoidant from the full force of difficult emotion. This is, for an avoidant, genuinely terrifying, not metaphorically. In the specific physiological sense of a nervous system that experiences emotional exposure as threat, because facing the hurt they caused requires exactly the kind of open, undefended, emotionally present vulnerability that their entire psychology was constructed to avoid. It requires them to be accountable without the protection of distance, to be seen in a moment of genuine failure without the option of retreating from the seeing, to offer repair, which requires the admission of wrongdoing, which requires the acknowledgement of impact, which requires the sustained emotional availability to sit with someone else's pain and be responsible for it without collapsing into self-protection. For someone who learned, early and formatively, that emotional vulnerability is dangerous, that being open and accountable and genuinely present with difficult feeling leads to the loss, the suffocation, the abandonment they have spent their adult life protecting against. This is not simply uncomfortable. It is, at the level the nervous system operates, the equivalent of being asked to stand in the open during a storm without shelter. So they find shelter, they hide, and the hiding looks from the outside like indifference, like composure, like proof that what happened did not matter enough to stay for. But from the inside, it is a person drowning in shame and fear, and the specific private agony of having damaged something they did not want to damage, with no adequate emotional tools for swimming to the surface. Now, what do they actually want in the depth of that hiding? Because this is the question the title of this conversation promises to answer, and it deserves the full, honest, psychologically complete answer rather than the simplified version that either flatters them too much or condemns them too thoroughly. The first thing they want, the most immediate, most urgent, most surface level wanting in the hiding, is for the shame to stop. This is not noble. It is not about you or the relationship or the repair that the hurt requires. It is the raw, self-directed, deeply human wish of someone in psychological pain, for the pain to become less acute. The shame of having caused hurt to someone who genuinely matters to them does not sit quietly in an avoidant. It does not get processed and metabolized in the ordinary way of someone with healthier emotional regulation. It amplifies, it circles. It becomes, in the absence of the external distraction that contact with you would require, the dominant internal experience, and they want it to stop in the way that any person in sustained psychological discomfort wants the discomfort to stop. This wanting, shame-driven, self-focused, not particularly admirable in its immediate motivation, is the first layer, and it is important to see it clearly, because the behaviors it produces can look like things they are not. The reaching out that sometimes follows avoidant hiding, when it arrives too quickly and with insufficient accountability, is often this first layer speaking, the wanting the shame to stop rather than the wanting to repair what they damaged. And those two motivations produce very different kinds of contact, and learning to tell them apart is one of the most practically important skills available in a dynamic with an avoidant who has caused hurt. The second thing they want is more complicated and more genuinely oriented toward you rather than toward their own discomfort. And it lives deeper in the hiding, underneath the shame and the fear and the self-protective mechanisms that constitute the first response. They want to know you are okay. Not okay in the sense of fine, not hurt, moved on. Okay in the specific and private sense that the person they care about, whose pain they caused and whose absence is now the defining feature of their internal landscape, is surviving, is still there, has not been destroyed by what happened in the way that the shame is telling them they destroyed it. This wanting is genuine. It is one of the places where the avoidant's actual caring breaks through the layers of defense and self-protection and becomes visible as the real thing it is. Because people who do not care do not lie awake wondering whether the person they hurt is okay. They do not carry the specific weighted worry of someone who knows they caused damage and needs in the private language of their own concern to know that the damage was not irreparable. They will not always act on this wanting in ways that are adequate or direct, or that give you any visibility into its existence. The acting on it tends to be as defended as everything else in their emotional repertoire. Indirect inquiry. The tentative, oblique reaching that cannot quite bring itself to say the honest thing at its center. The contact that arrives wrapped in something other than its actual motivation, because the actual motivation is too exposed to be sent without protection. But the wanting is there, real and specific and persistent in the hiding in ways that would probably surprise you if you could see it directly. Because the image of an avoidant in hiding tends to be the image of someone at peace with their distance. And the reality, when the connection was genuine, is the image of someone who is anything but at peace. Who is in the private, sustained, entirely self-created discomfort of a person who damaged something they valued and then ran from the damage and cannot stop thinking about what they left behind. The third thing they want in the hiding is the one that carries the most weight and the most complexity and the most potential for misreading in both directions. They want to come back without having to fully account for why they left. This wanting deserves to be examined with both compassion and clarity, because it is the most honest window into the specific dysfunction at the heart of avoidant attachment and why it keeps producing the same damage in the same relationships, regardless of how much genuine feeling underlies the pattern. The wanting to return without full accountability is not calculated, it is not a deliberate strategy to avoid consequences. It is the direct expression of the avoidant's most foundational relational fear, that full accountability, full honesty about what they did and why, and what it cost, will produce in you exactly the response they cannot tolerate. That naming the hurt directly, being present with its full weight, offering the kind of open and sustained and emotionally available repair that genuine accountability requires, will destroy what is left of the connection rather than restoring it. That the very act of standing still and being honest about their failure will be the thing that finally, irrevocably ends the thing they do not want to end. This is the tragic irony at the center of avoidant behavior after causing hurt. The thing they are most afraid will destroy the connection, genuine accountability, real repair, the honest and sustained vulnerability of being fully present with what their behavior produced, is the only thing that has any real possibility of restoring it. And the thing they reach for instead, the gradual return without full reckoning, the slow rewarming of the dynamic without the direct naming of what went wrong and why, is the thing most likely to produce the outcome they fear. Because it asks you to re-engage with a dynamic that has not been adequately repaired, to reinvest in a connection that has not demonstrated the capacity to handle its own ruptures honestly, to accept as sufficient something that is not sufficient, and to do so with the knowledge, running quietly underneath, that it is not sufficient, and that knowledge, accumulated over time, is corrosive in ways that eventually produce the very ending the avoidant was trying to prevent. The fourth thing they want, and this is the one that tends to be most surprising to people who have been hurt by an avoidant and are trying to understand what is happening in the hiding, is to be better than they were, not as a performed aspiration, not as something they would say to you if they were trying to re-engage and needed something compelling to offer, as a genuine, private, unglamorous wish that lives in the uncomfortable hours of the hiding and does not know how to become action. Avoidants who hurt someone they genuinely care about and then disappear into the aftermath are not, in most cases, people who are at peace with what they did. They are people who are sitting in the private knowledge of their own limitation, who can see, with the uncomfortable clarity that shame and distance together produce, the gap between who they want to be in a relationship and who they actually were, who understand, at some level of honesty, that their defenses usually prevent them from accessing, that the pattern that produced the hurt is not a one-time aberration, but a recurring feature of how they navigate closeness. And that recurring feature is costing them things they do not want to keep losing. The wanting to be better is real. It lives in the hiding, in the specific, frustrated, slightly despairing quality of someone who can see exactly what needs to change and cannot figure out how to change it. Who has the self-awareness to understand the pattern and lacks, as yet, the emotional tools to interrupt it? Who wants to be the person who stays and faces and repairs and does not run? And who is currently hiding, which is the most vivid possible evidence that wanting and doing are not yet the same thing for them. This gap between the wanting and the doing, between the self-awareness and the behavior change, between the genuine wish to be better and the continued operation of the patterns that prevent better from being possible, is where the avoidant lives in their most honest moments. And it is, alongside all the legitimate anger you are entitled to feel about the hurt and the hiding, one of the most genuinely pitiable aspects of a psychology that traps a person inside the repeated experience of damaging what they most value and being unable, without serious and sustained intervention, to stop. What does the hiding look like in practice? What are the specific behavioral signatures of an avoidant who has caused hurt and retreated from its consequences? And how do those signatures reflect the internal landscape just described? The most obvious signature is silence, the complete withdrawal of contact that can feel, from the receiving end, like abandonment layered on top of the original hurt. Like the wound of the thing they did, compounded by the wound of them not being present to acknowledge it. This silence is not comfortable for them, as has been established. But it is preferable, in the cost-benefit analysis of their nervous system, to the alternative of making contact and being required to be accountable for the contact's content. A less obvious signature is the performance of normalcy in spaces where their existence is visible to you without requiring direct engagement. The going about of life in ways that can be seen, demonstrating a functioning and apparently undisturbed continuation of ordinary existence. This performance is partly for you, a communication that says, I am fine, I do not need to address this, the thing between us is not occupying me in the way it is occupying you, and partly for themselves. A way of maintaining the self-narrative of someone who manages their emotional life rather than being managed by it. Neither the performance for you nor the performance for themselves is particularly successful. But both continue because the alternative, visibly not fine, visibly occupied, visibly sitting in the consequences of what they did, is more exposure than the current emotional state can support. Another signature is the indirect monitoring, the checking on your situation through routes that do not require direct contact, the paying attention to any available information about how you are doing without creating the conditions under which that information could become a conversation. This monitoring is the wanting to know you are okay made behavioral, expressed in the most defended possible form. It is caring that cannot bring itself to be visible as caring. It is concern routed through every available channel except the direct one. Here is where the conversation needs to shift from describing the avoidance experience to addressing yours. Because understanding why they are hiding and what they want in the hiding is useful information, genuinely useful, worth having, worth using to calibrate your understanding of the dynamic and what it means. But information about their interior experience is not a plan. It is not guidance for what you do next. And what you do next matters more than almost anything else in the aftermath of being hurt and then abandoned to process that hurt alone. The first and most important thing to establish is that you are not responsible for making the avoidance return from hiding easier on them. The shame they are sitting in is information, not punishment, not something you engineered, just the natural consequence of causing damage to someone who trusted them. And the discomfort of that shame is not yours to soothe. Not because you should want them to suffer, but because moving toward the soothing of their discomfort before your own hurt has been adequately acknowledged and repaired is the exact dynamic that has been running this whole time. You managing their emotional experience at the expense of your own. You making yourself available to their comfort before your own needs are on the table. The hurt they caused is on the table. It goes first. Not as a punishment, as the simple, non-negotiable reality that repair requires acknowledging the damage before addressing anything else. And if the avoidant cannot come out of hiding and stand in the honest, sustained, emotionally present accountability that real repair requires, if the return, when it comes, arrives without adequate reckoning, without the full and clear-eyed acknowledgement of what happened and what it cost you, then the return is not repair. It is the avoidant soothing their own shame by restoring the connection to a configuration in which they are comfortable. And that is a very different thing from the genuine repair that you deserve. You deserve genuine repair. This needs to be said with the directness it requires, because the dynamics that surround avoidant attachment have a way of making the people on the receiving end of avoidant behavior feel as though requiring adequate repair is itself a form of demand that will destabilize the connection. As though asking to be properly accountable to is itself too much. As though the appropriate response to being hurt and then abandoned in the hurt is to be patient and understanding and available for the return when the avoidant is ready, on their timeline, in the form they can manage. It is not. The appropriate response to being hurt and then hidden from is to require, clearly without apology, as the basic condition of re-engagement, that the hiding end in honest accountability rather than in the gradual rewarming of a dynamic that has not been properly repaired. Not with cruelty, not with the performance of consequence designed to produce a specific reaction. Simply with the self-respecting clarity of someone who knows what happened, knows what it cost, and knows what is required for the connection to be something real rather than something that keeps cycling through the same damage in the same pattern indefinitely. When the avoidant eventually emerges from hiding, and if the connection was genuine, the emergence tends to come driven by the accumulating weight of what they actually want, which has been described at length. The quality of the emergence tells you almost everything you need to know about whether what follows is real change or the same cycle wearing a new expression. Emergence with genuine accountability has specific qualities. It names what happened without minimizing it. It acknowledges the impact without immediately redirecting to the avoidant's own experience of the situation. It tolerates your response, including your anger, your hurt, your need for clarity, without shutting down or deflecting or converting your legitimate emotional reaction into evidence that you are too much to engage with. It stays, not perfectly, not without the strain that genuine accountability always carries for someone whose nervous system treats vulnerability as danger, but it stays. It does not resolve the discomfort by creating new distance. Emergence without genuine accountability also has specific qualities. It arrives with warmth and apparent openness, but without the direct naming of what happened. It focuses on the reconnection rather than the repair, on restoring the good feeling of the dynamic rather than on addressing the specific hurt that the dynamic produced. It is tender and perhaps even remorseful in a general sense, while being carefully imprecise about what exactly it is remorseful for. It wants the relationship to be okay, without requiring itself to fully reckon with what made it not okay. Knowing the difference is not always immediate. The distinction sometimes only becomes clear over the first few interactions after the return, in whether the accountability deepens or whether the warmth of reconnection is being used to close the subject before it has been properly opened. But the distinction is real and important and worth watching for, because accepting the second as sufficient when the first is what the situation requires is the choice that keeps the cycle running. Here is something about what you actually want in the aftermath of being hurt and then hidden from, that deserves its own honest naming, because this conversation has spent its length inside the avoidance wanting, and your wanting matters more. You want the hurt to be seen, not just acknowledged in the efficient let's move forward way of someone processing an obstacle, genuinely seen. The specific weight of what happened to you, the particular damage of being hurt by someone who then disappeared from the accountability of that hurt, the experience of carrying the wound alone in the silence of their hiding. You want someone to stand in front of that and be fully present with it. Not to fix it immediately, not to make it mean something other than what it meant. Simply to see it, to say, with their full and undefended presence, yes, this happened, and it cost you something real, and I am not going to look away from the cost. That is not a small thing to want. That is the most human and most legitimate want available in this situation. And an avoidant who is capable of giving it, who has done enough of their own work to be present with your pain without converting it into their own crisis. Who can hold the accountability without collapsing into shame, so consuming it becomes its own demand on your attention. Is an avoidant who is genuinely becoming something different from who they were when they caused the hurt. And an avoidant who cannot give it, who returns with warmth, but without the full, undefended presence that genuine seeing requires, is telling you something important about where they currently are in the work of changing the patterns that made the hurt possible in the first place. Both of those pieces of information are worth having. Both of them, clearly seen, give you what you need to make the decisions about your own life and your own continued investment in the connection that only you can make. What they want deep down, underneath the shame and the fear and the hiding and the indirect monitoring and the return without adequate accountability. What lives at the actual bottom of it. Past all the defense and all the pattern and all the psychological architecture that keeps producing the same damage, they want to be the person who stayed. Not in retrospect, not as a wish about a past they cannot change. As a present, future-facing, actively chosen, different way of being in the connection. They want to be the version of themselves that, when they caused hurt, did not run from the accountability of it. That stood in the discomfort of being responsible for someone else's pain and did not convert that discomfort into distance. That offered real repair rather than the gradual, shame-driven, inadequately honest restoration of comfortable proximity. They want to be capable of that. They want it privately, in the depth of the hiding, with the specific frustration of someone who can see exactly who they want to be and cannot yet close the distance between the wanting and the living. Whether they become that person is entirely, completely, solely their work to do, not yours, not the product of your patience or your understanding or your willingness to receive insufficient repair as though it is sufficient. Their work, their decision, their daily, unglamorous, deeply uncomfortable choosing of the open door over the familiar retreat. You cannot do it for them. You have already tried, in the 10,000 small ways that people who love difficult people try to do the work that only the difficult person can do for themselves. You have understood when understanding was not required of you. You have absorbed when the absorbing was costing you things you needed to keep. You have waited in silences that were never yours to fill. What you can do is be clear about what the hurt cost, about what genuine repair requires, about what you will and will not accept as sufficient in the aftermath of damage that deserved better than hiding, about the version of the connection that is worth re-entering and the version that is simply the same cycle with a newer starting point. That clarity, held without cruelty, offered without performance, grounded in the honest knowledge of what you deserve, is not a demand, it is an invitation. The clearest, most self-respecting, most genuinely loving invitation available in this situation. An invitation to be the person who finally, at real personal cost and against the full force of everything their history made them, stays. Whether they walk through it is their answer to the most important question their relational life has ever asked them. Your life in the meantime does not pause for the answer. It continues, full, moving, entirely worth inhabiting, with or without them in it, not as a threat, as the simple, grounded, unshakable truth of someone who finally, completely understands their own worth. And that understanding, arrived at through the specific, costly, ultimately clarifying experience of being hurt and hidden from by someone who wanted deep down to be better and could not yet find the way, is not nothing. It is, in the end, the most important thing the whole experience gave you. Not the connection, not the eventual return, if it comes, and not the closure if it does not. The knowledge, solid and permanent, and entirely your own, of exactly what you are worth, and exactly what love owes you, and exactly why you will never again accept less than the full, present, accountable, genuinely offered thing. That knowledge belongs to you now. Nothing that happens next can take it. And the thing about knowledge that has been earned rather than simply learned is that it does not behave like ordinary information. It does not sit quietly in the intellectual part of you, available for retrieval when relevant and otherwise dormant. It lives in the body, it moves through the nervous system, it changes the baseline, it becomes the new floor beneath which you will not go, not because you made a rule about it, but because the experience of going below it, of absorbing hurt and then processing it alone in the silence of someone else's hiding, is now so specifically, physically familiar that the early warning system activates long before you have reached the bottom again. This is what people mean when they say that certain experiences change you. Not the dramatic cinematic version of transformation, not the overnight arrival of a new self, unburdened and clear-eyed and entirely free of the patterns that the difficult thing produced. The quieter, more durable version, the gradual recalibration of what feels normal, the slow emergence of a self whose tolerance for certain things has genuinely permanently shifted. Not hardened, clarified. There is an important difference between the two, and it matters for how you carry what this experience gave you into the relationships and the interactions and the ordinary days that follow it. Hardness closes. It protects by refusing entry. It keeps the hurt out by keeping everything else out too, and the cost of that strategy is the specific accumulated impoverishment of a life lived behind its own walls, which is, incidentally, exactly what you have been watching the avoidant do to themselves for the entire duration of this dynamic. You know what that costs. You have had an intimate, prolonged, often agonizing view of what a person loses when they choose the safety of distance over the risk of genuine presence. You do not want that for yourself, and you do not have to choose it. Clarity keeps the door open while knowing what it is a door to. It does not refuse love. It refuses the specific, recognizable configurations of love that have already demonstrated their cost. It can tell the difference, not perfectly, not immediately, but with increasing accuracy, between the kind of connection that nourishes and the kind that depletes, between the person who is doing the genuine work of showing up and the person who is performing the appearance of showing up, while quietly, consistently failing to actually arrive, between repair that restores and repair that simply restores the avoidance comfort while leaving your wound inadequately tended. There is something specific that happens to your capacity for love after an experience like this, and it deserves to be named with the care it requires. Because one of the fears that tends to live in the aftermath of being hurt by an avoidant and then abandoned in the hurt is the fear that the experience has damaged your ability to love openly, that the wound has made you smaller in some essential way, that the caution you now carry into new connections is a form of diminishment, evidence that something that was once whole in you has been compromised by what happened. This fear is understandable. It is also, in most cases, wrong. What the experience actually did to your capacity for love is not diminish it, it educated it. It gave it context and precision that it did not have before. It taught it the difference between the courage of loving someone who cannot receive love properly and the courage of loving someone who can, and showed it, through the specific and costly curriculum of lived experience, that these two things are not equally worthy uses of the same finite resource, that love given to someone who is hiding from its accountability is not less real than love given to someone who can stand in it. But it is less well-placed, and well-placed love offered to someone whose capacity to receive it is matched by your capacity to give it, whose willingness to show up is consistent enough to meet your willingness to be present, whose repair when they cause hurt is genuine enough to actually close the wound rather than paper over it, produces something that the dynamic you have been in could never produce. It produces rest, the specific, profound, almost unfamiliar rest of a love that does not require constant vigilance, that does not ask you to monitor and interpret, embrace and absorb, that does not deliver its best moments wrapped in the anxiety of not knowing when the next withdrawal is coming, that simply exists, present, consistent, available in the ordinary daily way that nourishing things are available, without the drama and the charge and the exhausting intermittency that made what you had feel so alive and cost so much. The avoidant is still hiding. Or they have emerged, or they are somewhere in the particular suspended state between hiding and returning that avoidants tend to occupy in the aftermath of having caused significant hurt. And wherever they are in that arc, the question that tends to live in you alongside everything else is the question of whether the hiding will end in something real, whether the return, if it comes, will be the return of someone who has genuinely reckoned with what their patterns cost, or the return of someone who has managed the discomfort of the hiding down to a level that makes re-engagement feel possible again, without the underlying architecture having changed. The honest answer is that you cannot know yet. The hiding itself tells you relatively little about which outcome is coming, because the same hiding can precede both. What tells you is what comes after the hiding ends, the quality of the return. Whether it carries the specific, uncomfortable, cannot be faked texture of genuine accountability, or the smoother, more comfortable texture of someone who has done enough internal processing to feel okay about re-engaging without having done enough to actually be different. But here is what you can know, right now, in the middle of the not yet knowing. You can know what you require, not what you hope for, not what you would accept if the alternative is losing the connection entirely, not what you have previously been willing to receive as sufficient when it was not. What you actually require. From any return, from any re-engagement, from any version of the connection going forward, you require the hurt to be named. By them. Directly. Without the softening of language that reduces what happened to something more manageable for the person doing the naming. You require the impact to be acknowledged. Not in the general. I know I hurt you way that allows the acknowledgement to function as a checkbox rather than a genuine reckoning, but in the specific way that demonstrates they actually understand what happened to you, rather than simply knowing that something happened. You require the hiding to be accounted for, not punished, accounted for, because the hiding was its own wound, separate from and additional to the original hurt. The experience of being left alone to process damage in the silence of someone else's self-protective withdrawal is not a minor footnote to the main event. It is its own thing. And it deserves its own honest acknowledgement, rather than being quietly absorbed into the general territory of things that are not directly addressed in the restoration of comfortable proximity. And you require evidence, over time and in ordinary circumstances, that the pattern is actually changing, not the intention to change. Not the remorseful acknowledgement that change is needed, the behavioral, observable, lived evidence of someone who is doing the specific and unglamorous work of interrupting the patterns that produced the hurt in the first place. Who is staying when the staying is uncomfortable? Who is speaking when the speaking requires vulnerability they do not yet entirely have the capacity for? Who is getting it wrong sometimes, and acknowledging the getting it wrong honestly rather than retreating from the accountability of it? These requirements are not excessive. They are not the demands of someone who is punishing the avoidant for having a difficult attachment style. They are the minimum conditions for a connection that is genuinely different from the one that produced the hurt and the hiding. And insisting on them, clearly without apology, as the non-negotiable baseline of any return, is not cruelty. It is the most self-respecting thing you can do for both yourself and for any real possibility of the connection becoming something worth having. Something worth saying about the experience of sitting in the aftermath of avoidant hurt and hiding, in the particular suspended state of not yet knowing how or whether it resolves, is that this state has its own psychological impact that tends to go unaddressed. Because most of the attention in the conversations around avoidant dynamics goes to the dramatic moments, the withdrawal, the hurt, the eventual return, or the definitive ending. The space in between tends to be described as simply waiting, as the neutral territory of not yet resolved. But it is not neutral, it is one of the more actively demanding psychological states available in relational life. Because you are being asked, by the simple fact of the unresolved situation, to hold ambiguity at a sustained level that requires genuine emotional resources. To not know, in a way that does not collapse into either the premature certainty of it is over, or the premature certainty of it will be fine. To remain present with the full, unresolved, uncomfortably open reality of a situation that has not yet declared itself. This is hard. It is particularly hard for people whose attachment histories have given them their own complicated relationship with ambiguity, whose nervous systems learned from their own early experiences to treat uncertainty as a precursor to loss, for whom the not knowing activates a specific anxiety that makes the premature resolution of any kind feel preferable to the sustained discomfort of the open question. If this is true for you, if the ambiguity of the avoidance hiding is activating something in your own attachment system that feels less like situational anxiety and more like a familiar patterned fear, then what the situation is offering you, alongside everything else, is a window into your own patterns, your own relationship with uncertainty, your own history with the specific experience of being left in the suspended state of not knowing by someone whose behavior determines the quality of your emotional life. That window is worth looking through. Not at them, at yourself. At the specific ways this dynamic has resonated, not just because of their patterns, but because of how those patterns land on yours. Because the resonance between avoidant withdrawal and whatever it activates in you is not random. It is the collision of two attachment histories, two nervous systems, two sets of early learning about what love is and what it costs and what happens when it goes quiet. And understanding your side of that collision, with the same honesty and compassion that this conversation has attempted to bring to their side, is one of the most valuable things the entire experience can offer. The avoidant is hiding, and what they want deep down is to be better than they have been. You are here, holding the wound and the ambiguity and the genuine, complicated love that does not simply dissolve because the person it was directed at caused hurt and then disappeared. And what you want, underneath everything, underneath the anger that is entirely legitimate, and the grief that is entirely real, and the exhaustion of having been the one who kept showing up in a dynamic that kept asking for more than it returned, is something that deserves to be named as clearly and as honestly as everything else in this conversation. You want the love to have been worth it, not in the sense of requiring the outcome to justify the investment, not requiring the avoidant to return and be different and build something real with you in order for the experience to have meaning, but in the deeper sense of the love itself having been real, of the connection having been genuine, of the time and the feeling and the specific irreplaceable experience of having been close to that particular person, having counted for something in the larger accounting of your life. It was real, the love was real, the connection was genuine. Whatever happens next, whether the hiding ends in genuine repair or in the quiet confirmation that the pattern cannot yet be changed, whether the dynamic becomes something different or completes its arc, None of that retroactively makes the feeling false. None of it makes you foolish for having felt it. None of it means the experience was simply loss without lesson, cost without anything worth keeping. What you keep is everything this conversation has been pointing toward. The clarity, the self-knowledge, the specific hard-won understanding of your own worth and your own requirements and your own capacity for love that is too complete and too genuine and too worth honoring to be offered again to someone who cannot receive it without hiding from its weight. You keep the part of yourself that loved fully and honestly and without the armor that the avoidant could never put down, the part that showed up open when the easier thing would have been to match their distance with your own. The part that tried, long past the point where trying was comfortable because the connection mattered and the mattering felt worth honoring. That part of you is not naive. It is not evidence of poor judgment or insufficient self-protection. It is one of the most genuinely courageous aspects of who you are. The willingness to love someone difficult without becoming difficult yourself. The capacity to understand without losing your own perspective. The ability to hold compassion for someone's wounds while also holding clear-eyed awareness of what those wounds keep producing in the people who try to love them. The avoidant in hiding wants to come back as someone better. Whether they do is their work. Whether you are there when they arrive, and in what capacity, under what conditions, with what requirements clearly named and held, is yours. Make that decision from the fullest possible version of yourself. Not from the part that is tired and wants the ambiguity to end on any terms available. Not from the part that misses the best moments of the connection so acutely that the worst moments lose their proper weight. Not from the part that has spent so long trying to understand the avoidance psychology that it has temporarily lost contact with the simpler, more personal question of what you actually need and whether this connection in its current or realistically foreseeable form can provide it. From the part that knows, that has always known, if you are honest about it, what you need and what this has and has not been delivering. That knows the difference between the connection being real and the connection being sufficient, between loving someone and being well loved by them. Between a relationship that has genuine potential and a relationship that has genuine feeling but insufficient foundation for the potential to build on, that part of you has been present this whole time. Patient, quiet, occasionally drowned out by hope or desire, or the specific powerful pull of a connection that was real even when it was insufficient, but present. And it has something to tell you that is worth finally, fully, unhurriedly hearing. Not about them, about you, about what comes next. About the life that is waiting on the other side of this particular suspended state, whether it includes them or not, whether it resolves in repair or in the quiet, dignified, entirely self-respecting decision to walk towards something that does not require you to earn the right to be met. That life is real. It is not contingent on their emergence from hiding, or their capacity for genuine accountability, or the eventual answer to the question of whether they become the person they want deep down to be. It is yours, already, right now, in the middle of the not yet knowing. Go live it.